Well, folks, we'll get started in 1 minute. Okay, everyone, welcome to the Art of TradeStation. I'm David Russell, VP of Market Intelligence at TradeStation Group. And today we're going to talk about trend following with some of the tools available on TradeStation. And before we get started, I'm going to share some links with you guys that include the workspaces that we use for this. And if you want to go ahead and download those, you can do that while we are getting started. Just go ahead and download the zip. We're going to put that in right now. Let me just actually, it's going to be in the chat. We're going to be using chat for this, by the way. All right, so here's one of them. Go ahead and download that. And then when I'm done reading the disclosures, I'll tell you what to do with it. This content is for educational and informational purposes only. Any symbols, trading, financial instruments, or trading strategies discussed are for demonstrational purposes only and are not research or recommendation. TradeStation Companies does not provide legal, tax, or investment advice. Past performance, whether actual or indicated by historical tests or strategies, is not a guarantee of future performance or success. There's a possibility that you may sustain a loss equal to or greater than your entire investment, regardless of which asset class you trade: equities, options, futures, or cryptocurrencies. Therefore, you should not invest or risk money that you cannot afford to lose. Online trading is not suitable for everyone. Visit TradeStation.com/important information for a copy of the document of characteristics and risk of standardized options. Before trading any asset class, customers must read the relevant risk disclosure statements on our important documents and information page. System access and trade placement and execution may be delayed or fail due to market volatility and volume quote delays, system and software errors, internet traffic outages, and other factors. TradeStation Securities, TradeStation Crypto Inc., and TradeStation Technologies Inc. are each wholly owned subsidiaries of TradeStation Group Inc., all operating and providing products and services under the TradeStation brand and trademark. You Can Trade Inc. is also a wholly owned subsidiary of TradeStation Group Inc., operating under its own brand and trademarks. TradeStation Crypto Inc. offers to self-directed investors and traders cryptocurrency brokers services. It is neither licensed with the SEC or the CFTC, nor is it a member of NFA. When applying for or purchasing account subscriptions, products, and services, it is important to know which company you will be dealing with. Please visit TradeStation.com/important information for further important information explaining what this means. Any examples or illustration provided are hypothetical in nature and do not reflect results actually achieved and do not account for fees, expenses, or other important considerations. These types of examples are provided to illustrate mathematical principles and are not meant to predict or project the performance of a specific investment or investment strategy. Accordingly, this information should not be relied upon when making a financial decision. Okay, so I shared this link with you guys, and I'm now going to show you how to make the workspace work. Let me just open up one of my folder here. So this is the zip file that you'll open. You're going to see three things in the zip file. You're going to see this PowerPoint. This is actually the PDF, the final slides. This is a PDF I'm going to be working through as a PDF version. We have this thing called the Easy Language Document, RSI Passed. You're going to want to double click on that. And when you do that, make sure you have TradeStation open. You're going to see it's going to import an indicator code, RSI Passed, which I already have. So I'm going to kill that, but you can do it. You'll import this new indicator. I've never shared this indicator with anyone yet. So even you guys who've attended some of my other sessions will not have this indicator yet. I just created it. And once that indicator is created, then you can double click on the blue TradeStation workspace, Art of TS, June 2022. And this is what you will see. You'll see 4 charts. And this, by the way, is RSI Passed down here that we're going to be working with. Okay, so going on now to slide number 4. Very briefly, what is trend following? And then basically we're going to go through Keltner channels, rate of change, relative strength indicator, RSI, parabolic SAR moving averages used together, relative strength versus the S&P, same name as this, but 2 different things completely, and then exponential moving average ribbons, excuse me. All right, so let's just get started. What is trend following? Trend following looks to capture stocks momentum in a particular direction. So we're basically looking for stocks and ETFs in multi-week uptrends or downtrends. That's when a stock is making higher highs and higher lows, and we're looking basically to buy a higher low for continuation or to sell a lower high for continuation to the downside. We're looking for opportunities that appear to have 2 to 4 times greater potential to move in our favor than to move against us. So upside, versus downside, but if you're short, it's just the opposite. So basically, I'm going to start with Keltner channels. This is basically one of the 4 charts, which I'm going to show you in a second. But Keltner channels consist of, and we're now on slide 6, Keltner channels consist of a simple moving average in the middle, and then it also consists of an average true range projected on either side of those. Now, you guys can Google and look about how these other things work, like average true range, but it basically projects likely movements based on historical movement. And now this can be good for spotting trends, to find potential entries, and to set potential stop losses. So now let's take a look over at the workspace. Now I said we have 4 workspaces here. This one is the one with Keltner channels. So I'm going to maximize that. So basically, this is a 20-day moving average as the midline, and then it projects on either side these channels. And these channels can be used, as I mentioned, for entries and exits. So what I think is interesting about this is that this allows us to essentially look for things. This adjusts for obviously something being overbought or oversold at any moment in time, but it also clearly outlines in many cases trend possibilities. So we're looking now at XLE, which is the energy ETF, which is like the only part of the market that's been going up this year. But let's look first at AbbVie. This is one I was watching. I noticed this incredible trend here in this stock. Now, this was pretty interesting because if you look at AbbVie, like in February, if you look, it broke out back in, right around here. And then if you look at this basic pullback, once it came off the bottom and it just basically held the midline kind of the whole way up. And now what's also interesting is when it broke here, you can notice that once it broke under the midline, it's been just kind of weak ever since. So this can give us a good sense of both entries and when the trend is ending. Usually when things remain in the middle, that can be a useful sort of signal that we're looking for. Now, let's look at some other examples. For example, look at a stock like Mosaic. This is a fertilizer stock, and we actually wrote about this back in, I believe, early February on Market Insights. At the end, I need to actually share with you guys my Market Insights blog where I write a lot of these things. We were writing about what was happening in the fertilizer stocks. And if you look at a stock like here with Mosaic, when it basically broke out, what's interesting is it basically, once it got above the middle of the trend line at different points, like that was like a clear opportunity. But once it closed under that midline and it started breaking down at the bottom, it's basically just been kind of dead money since. So this can be, if you're following a trend, this can be something where it can be useful, where this would give you that kind of signal that it is broken. I've also noticed recently that things often don't work in the middle of the channel when they're trending. What you'll often see is you'll see it riding up the midline, and then when it breaks the midline, it's done. Now, another example of this is when you have something, something is drifting, and then often you will get a kind of stab downward, and then you get the continuation. So you look at like energy here, you see the move that energy essentially made in early March. It moved sideways for about 2 months, and then it kind of, and if you notice, it was way here above the Keltner channels where it kind of quote unquote should be based on mathematical principles, you can then notice that, for a month and a half, it basically moved sideways. And then when it finally came down and basically held and came off the bottom of the Keltner channel, that kind of gave the confirmation as well. So this is an example of how it can be used both for trend following, like moments like this, and for knowing just an oversold kind of condition in something that is neutral in a kind of shorter term, but where you still have a longer term bullishness. So it can be a really interesting sort of tool. All right. Now, the thing I want to mention on all this is these are all charts, and you can see that it's useful to use all of these kind of together. These are just a few different examples specifically for something like the Keltner channel. But you can see there's some other interesting signals that popped up as well on some of these others. Like we're going to get the Parabolic SAR, but this started giving bullish right around a similar time here. Shortly after this break lower, but you can see this gave another signal. So we're gonna look at all of those. But next I want to go to trend following with rate of change. Rate of change is a simple percentage change over a trailing time period. Incrementally higher lows may precede price extension to the upside. The opposite can be true to the downside. So stocks with consistently negative readings can be viewed as under distribution. Now, this might not be a huge surprise, but what's interesting is that when stocks have consistently weak values on rate of change, it means that they are kind of trending lower. But now the thing is that very often, if we don't take a step back and use rate of change, then we don't actually clearly see this, and it can help kind of keep our head in the right direction here. So this is rate of change in the bottom of the Keltner channel chart. Now let's look at some individual examples here that are really kind of standing out that can help us, see some of these sort of trends that are taking shape. Now let's take a look at Tesla. Late last year, Tesla starting in around October, September, really. You can notice that Tesla started making incrementally higher lows on the rate of change. The stock itself was barely moving, and it was not noticed much. Most of the NASDAQ at that point was kind of weak. And the one that was really showing some interesting strength was Tesla. But what's interesting about this is that it had this bigger pullback and this long period of consolidation. And then you can see that rate of change started making higher lows, and then you get an extension to the upside. So that's an example of how something like rate of change can point you in the right direction. Then if you look at something like Zoom Video in October of last year, you can see that Zoom had now this is an example of a downtrend. But what's interesting is this stock basically tried to hold this level around 280 for about 2 months. But what's interesting here is that when it went up and then it started kind of petering out, the rate of change started making lower highs, and it started showing that this period of strength was starting to fizzle. And you could see something similar around here. Once this started moving lower, and you can see you have this high, and what's interesting is that the stock really didn't make any difference here, but what you can see is that the rate of change was making lower highs. So you had this long period here when Zoom did not make any new lows, but you started to see rate of change signaling it as it happened in both cases. Okay. Now, a bullish example will be Occidental Petroleum, starting in December. What's interesting about a name like this is you can see also this stock really was not doing much of anything, but you can see an interesting pattern here of higher lows consistently on rate of change. So what this does is this tells you that a potential sort of breakout is coming. And it also can give you a sense of added confidence that once the actual break to new highs occurs, that there is real buying pressure underneath it. And so this is, I think, an interesting example because you can see almost like a trend line along the bottom of this here. And again, now we see our Keltner channels basically applying where once it breaks out, holds the middle, and then we have our signals going higher. And a bearish example would be NIO. There's a Chinese electric car company that a lot of people were trading a lot about a year and a half ago. Now, if you look at NIO in August of last year, again, you had a stock that had basically been, really kind of, consolidating for a period of time. And then you start to see, I'm sorry, it was not in August. I wrote the wrong date. It wasn't August. It was November. So you kind of see here You start, once you start to see the lower highs, it also gives you that sort of signal. And again, you see the same sort of thing when once it gets under the midline of the Keltner channels, that gives you this kind of pattern you're looking for. So that was slide 8. Are those EMA lines? No, on this chart, this is, oops, wait a second, let me bring that back. There it is. These are Keltner channels. So basically the way Keltner channel works, it uses a tool called average true range. And what it does is it projects average true range on either side of the 20-day simple moving average. Now, I know with some charting packages, they actually use the exponential moving average for Keltner channel. So just realize TradeStation uses the simple moving average in this Keltner channel calculation. Any concern that these are lagging indicators? Well, what's interesting, I would say, is that the thing about something like rate of changes is that it's lagging, but it can give signals about the coming direction, because basically what will happen is that the intensity of the move will weaken relative to itself. And that's the most important thing to realize about this. So I think that for something like this, you can actually see when the weakness is getting less weak or the strength is getting less strong, it can give you a confirmation that the trend is moving in the direction you want it to be. One of the big things that we're trying to achieve here is that you can say, oh, you know, NEO's going lower, I want to short it. And you can try and short it like here or something. And, you know, how do you actually know that this is the opportunity to short it? That looks like a nice place to short it. But if you actually look at it, you can see that rate of change was trending higher. So the thing is that when you start to see the weakening of it, that's going to give you the sense that you really have the continuation of the bigger move that you have in mind. The problem when things are trending is how do you actually know that it's the right moment for the trend to continue in the right direction? And that's what some of these tools can help with. That's funny, you know, I actually kind of came with a little joke, you know, based on Dr. Strangelove for this webinar, how I learned to stop worrying and buy the pullback. And that's exactly what this sort of you know, approach is. This gives you a greater sense of confidence when you actually see something like rate of change confirming the weakness versus just saying, well, this is a bearish stock and I want to be, you know, bearish on it. It can help to actually have something like rate of change with these, looking for these, a pattern like this can kind of give you that clear direction. And once you see that, then very often you're going to get the continuation. The same way here, you had the bearish, but then on Occidental, you had just the opposite. So that's kind of how I wanted to point to using it here. Now, the next thing I want to go to is relative strength indicator, RSI, called Wilder's RSI, made by, I think his name was Wells Wilder. It's a momentum indicator that normalizes price swings to see how a stock is performing against its own recent history. Now, let me just, well, often used as an overbought, oversold indicator, RSI can measure the overall strength of stock. Higher lows can help spot symbols in bigger uptrends, and the same to the downside. Okay, so what's interesting now about RSI, and this is down here on this chart, let's open this up. Now, RSI is intended to be used as an overbought, oversold kind of indicator. Now, the thing that I've actually noticed that RSI is far more useful for, especially in this market, is that instead of simply looking for something that is oversold per se, it can be used to actually show the strength of a stock. So let's look at this. And what I mean by this is, let's look at two examples. Let's look at the XLK. XLK is a technology ETF. What's interesting about this is XLK dropped to an oversold reading back here in late January. And you'll notice that even if you bought that, you'd still be down from then. When something goes into an oversold condition on RSI, yeah, it might be a short-term bounce, but the key thing is that when things tend to stay weaker in RSI, it means that they're under distribution. So the opposite example would be XLE. So RSI fell down to what, around 27, I said in the PowerPoint. This is the actual reading down here on the RSI indicator, which you can see there's 27, the little blue in my dialog box. So oversold does not mean that it's necessarily, you know, a great opportunity. Then look at XLE. XLE at the same time, it fell no lower than I think right around here around 62 or something. So what this tells us is that this, when the overall market was weakening, I'm sorry, at this point, you can see that this barely had a dip at all. It was overbought and it remained overbought for the next like 2 to 3 months. So what does this tell you? When something is hitting the top of RSI, it means that that is a trend that you can look for the upside. And when something is hitting the bottom of RSI, it also means that your trend is, working to the downside. So I'm going to get to this special indicator I created in a second, but let's just look at, I'll just read through this. Using this methodology, trend followers can target favored stocks, it should say, whose RSI remains above the middle of the oscillator. They can avoid companies with a history of falling into oversold territory. So for example, I want to just point this out. When a downtrend begins, the real flag can be something like a bad reading on RSI. So look at, for example, Upstart Holdings back in November of last year. Once it fell down into oversold, it basically continued lower, significantly from that moment. And look at when it was in overbought. It basically continued with significant strength. Even here it had a big pullback, but it continued, it didn't even retrace that entire move. And then it made a higher low. And then RSI remained overbought as it went from 167 to almost 400. So that is an example of hot RSI giving you a strong sort of, bullish signal. But then as soon as it turns cold, basically, where your trend is going. So that's what I wanted to kind of point out here about, this concept I'm using for RSI. Now, I should mention that this is not my own thought. A lot of people do this. And if you actually look on Investopedia, there's the idea of relative RSI. So the idea would be in a stock like, this one, this does not reach the overbought level for RSI, but is relatively high for a stock that is, when you look at it, it's high relative to where it's been. So I wanted to just kind of point that out because from my perspective, yeah, look, that's an oversold signal. The traditional use of RSI, I would say to just buy it when it turns blue here. But the thing is that those can be trying to catch falling knives. And in many cases, a way that I find this can be useful for trend followers is to use the RSI to generate an actual signal. So how do we do that? We have a special tool called RSI Passed. Now, this is an easy language custom study that I created for you guys. It counts the number of bars from the last overbought or oversold readings. And then what it will do is it will basically tell you, was the last one positive or was the last one negative? So for something like Upstart, that hit an basically an oversold level there. And each time it does that, it resets the counter. So when it finds the last one, then it shows how many bars ago that basically happened. And then the same thing to the upside, like with something like energy or something like that. The last time it hit a hot reading, it will it'll reset the bar upward. And this will be based on the number itself doesn't matter because what this is based on the bar number. So the bars start counting from the left. And so a chart like this has, I don't even know how many days back this goes. This probably goes back like 2 or 3 years. And then basically it's counting each bar and then it's resetting it based on that bar. So the number doesn't matter. What matters is whether it's positive or negative. So this is a special indicator, and I do find this to be pretty useful. That we all have temptations to think we're smarter than the trend, to try and catch falling knives. And very often with trend following, the hardest thing is doing the obvious thing. The kind of just following where the numbers are and not trying to be too smart. Very often we most things in life, we want to be smart. We want to be, kind of setting ourselves apart. But when it comes to trend following, we really want to be sheep because we're just little people following these massive institutional investors. And these are large flows of money moving around, and individual retail investors simply need to try and follow where they're going and not fight it. And something like RSI can actually give you a pretty good window into that. So just so you know, when you use this, there are the actual indicator boxes you can go into. So let me just very quickly show you how to customize this. If you double click on it, you can actually see here, this is set to 14 candles, which is a normal RSI interval. And then it has the threshold of 30 and 70, which are the overbought and oversold levels, which are the standard kind of settings for RSI. Do you have an email address where we can follow up? Yes, I'm going to share it. It's drussell@tradestation.com. Please send the indicator download. Manolo, could you please put that link in again? All right, I'm going to keep going. All right, next we're going to move on to parabolic SAR and moving averages. Parabolic SAR stop reverse. I think it was also created by Mr. Wilder. Plots boundaries of trends and accelerates as the trend progresses. Parabolic SAR always gives short-term signals. Combining it with a longer-term moving average can help traders find potential opportunities. This is slide 13. Actually, before we move on, I want to mention one other I just saw today that I thought was really interesting, which was CCL. I want to just mention this. This is the cruise line, and you can see it tried to, kind of stabilize a lot. But notice how when it went into oversold from here, it does an immediate signal. But once it really went into that level, it never really came back. And now this one looks like, it's interesting. If you actually look on Market Insights, we had an article about this one with some very interesting long-term put action in this name. I'll try and see if I can find that for you guys. Meanwhile, let's go back now to Parabolic SAR, which is this one. Slide 13, right? So what Parabolic SAR does is it basically, this is a good example to see. When something is trending lower, what this does is this will plot the trend. And it's kind of a complicated formula, but what it basically does is as the trend progresses, it follows. And then what happens is that when price touches that, then it reverses. It's called stop and reverse for that reason. So the thing about something like this is, it will give a ton of signals, and sometimes the signals are not, hugely useful. So what we want to do is, one approach that people use is they'll combine it with something like a moving average. So for example, when you have, a classic example of this is actually ARK, the ARK, fund. When this was above the 200-day moving average, I'm going to actually set this. I go to edit symbol. Let me change this to 3 years back. You can see the 200-day moving average. When this was above the 200-day moving average, basically looking to be long when the SAR was below was a strategy that people can look to do. And then once it goes below, and especially once, something like this is kind of a period of, uncertainty and, changing of long-term direction. But once it really goes below and the 200-day moving average starts to fall, that's when the parabolic SAR starts to kind of give you clearer signals. Now, what's interesting about this is the idea is that this will always give you signals. So, they're not always necessarily all that good, but the key thing is that when you combine this with this, those two things together can give you a strong sense of trend following. Now, there's one thing about this that can be problematic. The dots reverse direction as soon as a counter trend test occurs. It often turns bullish at a short-term high with the risk of a drop before the signal move begins. So waiting for a smaller pullback or counter trend move can potentially offset the risk. So it's actually interesting. I think if we look here at something like, for example, even this drop. So, once it hits the blue, it turns bearish, and then it basically moves higher for about 10 sessions before it continues lower. The same thing was true for, ExxonMobil is an example I saw a while back here, with Exxon. Exxon here basically triggered a bullish right here. So basically, Exxon hits the top of its range, triggers a bullish, and then it retests back lower. So the thing to remember is this will signal when, if you're looking bullish, this will signal when the stock is overbought. And if you're bearish, it will signal when it's oversold. So waiting several candles can often, kind of increase your sort of chances. And looking for something to get closer back down here is often can kind of increase your your setup. So I wanted to mention that. The other interesting thing about Parabolic SAR is that as it goes higher, it accelerates higher. It has an accelerator in it. And what will happen is that it will tighten up and tighten up. And that can actually kind of help you, when things get like really frothy in one direction, it'll kind of help you, know when, it can give you a potential signal that the opportunity to kind of get out. So I wanted to just kind of mention that, because what's interesting here about energy is this is getting really kind of close here. And I wanted to just, kind of mention that, because energy's been bullish here for a long time, but the SAR is getting very close. So basically now, if it goes down and touches near this level, and tomorrow the SAR will be higher. So if it touches near this blue dot tomorrow, it's going to flip bearish. And that would kind of signal that at least, people don't want to necessarily be, on the long side. And I think it's interesting because if you look in other cases, this kind of gave a signal here. But what's interesting is, this was not much of a move. But then when you put all this together, this is a decent move. Then you get a sideways pattern for a while. Then you get a big stretch. And now this could be starting to signal, if it does signal in the other direction, this could be one where the opportunity for something like upside in energy is kind of stretch itself out. All right, so that was 14. Relative strength versus the S&P 500. Okay, so this is a different indicator. Relative strength compares the price performance of a broader index to the stock in question. It can highlight stocks with greater buying interest in the broader market. Relative strength is completely different than Wilder's relative strength index. Okay. So there are some examples here that I wanted to show you guys for slide 15. Again, Tesla's interesting. So now we're looking at this chart. These are exponential moving average ribbons that I'm going to get to, and this is relative strength. Now, what's interesting here is, if you actually look at the indicator, you can see that it's set to compare with SPY. So what this is going to do is this is going to compare the trailing 10-day performance of SPY to the trailing 10-day performance of the stock. And when things are doing better than the stock, that tells you that people are on the aggregate buyers of the sector or of the stock in question. And now you can change that. For example, you could set this to Qs or the Dow Jones Industrial Average. The only thing is you might want to make sure you use the ETF, because sometimes if like some people have different time intervals on their like if you use the S&P index, for example, if you use the cash index, it might have a different time interval in terms of price delays, data delays, and it might not work with the stock. So I would just mention that if you want to compare things, it's best to compare, an ETF to a stock, because they're both equity products. So anyway, what's very interesting about this one is, look at this also, same sort of thing in October, but look here at Tesla. Look at this entire period of relative strength just kind of brewing before the extension. And this is the sort of thing that that I was trying to kind of point out later. You'll see these periods of quiet building followed by extension, and that's the sort of thing that this indicator can give you. Another one I think is very interesting. I look at a lot. I've mentioned this because this is just one that I was following closely before COVID hit. Sorry, silence my phone. I'm going to change data on this one and look back like 5 years. Now, this isn't one of the Cathie Wood stocks that did extremely well during COVID, and it's struggled since. But what's really interesting to me is that this stock basically had significant relative strength, before COVID hit. And if you look at the relative strength on it, all throughout this period of time when the market was crashing in March, this showed significant relative strength. And this is true for other stocks as well. But there's just a sort of indication for you that this was consistently showing relative strength going into COVID and during the entire pullback, and then you had some significant upside afterward. That was SE. Another one that's interesting is Merck. There's been a shift toward traditional pharmaceutical names lately, and if you look at this stock, starting in kind of March and into April, you see a period here of some real relative strength. And once this sort of kind of starts, you usually expect a period of continuation of it. So when you start to see something that is really showing relative strength against the overall market, that also tells you that can help you have confidence in the trend. And very often it can be when something is starting to outperform, coming out of a period of like consolidation of something like this, and it can give you some potential opportunities. It's also interesting that, and I've written about this, and to me, it's actually I have an article today on Market Insights about it, is China. This is the FXI. And this has been showing interesting relative strength really since the beginning of May. Now, the Chinese situation is very interesting. We started to really see it here and it's interesting also to look at something like this on the longer term. You saw significant bearishness for a year and a half. And then we're starting to see periods of relative strength here in a kind of consistent way. This to me is starting to give an interesting signal, and Chinese stocks are to me an interesting sort of thing that's starting to pop up right now in the market. So I'm going to show you one more thing because I actually have an article on Chinese stocks and I'm going to share with you guys. But first I want to show you the one other thing, which is EMA ribbons. Exponential moving average ribbons can highlight established trends using a series of exponential moving averages. It can give potential long and short signals when ribbons clearly indicate direction. So, we're looking at EMA ribbons. The way this works is the lighter colored ones are the faster moving ones. And when you see them pointing in a single direction like this, this is a bearish one. It's easier to see with bullish ones. So let's go back to something like energy, which has been a good example of this. What we can see is that they compress together here and there's no real signal. It could kind of go either way based on EMA, on the EMA ribbons. But what's interesting is once it expands in this direction, the pullbacks into the EMA ribbons, those are potential buying opportunities. But the key thing is the direction. The nice fanned open EMA ribbons, these give a strong trend signal. They don't necessarily, it's not always clear exactly where the buying opportunity should be inside of the EMA ribbons. But when you see the EMA ribbons all pointing in this direction, that's a strong trend signal. And then you can use other things like, for example, on this one we had, like I mentioned, there were, with Keltner channels, this moment here, this right here and this right here is the same sort of indicator. So I wanted to just kind of mention that because this is something where it's going to point in a direction of trend that can be useful. So what we want to do is we want to look for trends to confirm. We want to look for the ribbons to confirm the trend and then kind of seek opportunities when price test into the trend. So what's interesting here is look at, for example, Meta, Facebook, as we used to call it. Look at this signal in mid-April. There's a very kind of clear bearishness, and that's exactly what we saw right here. This gave us a sense that the trend was very much to the downside in something like Meta. What's also interesting in a name, this shows, actually, I mentioned first, this shows the trend reversal. You basically have this period where the trend is higher. You can see a period of trend reversal when basically it's just kind of meaningless. It's not something, and then it has a clear fanning out in one direction. What's interesting is Apple recently kind of had some similar sort of patterns, which is one of the more concerning things with the market, is that basically this is a situation where this was pointing and the trend was pointing in a bullish direction, and now the ribbons are essentially pointing in the bearish direction. So again, these are things that kind of give you confidence in the trend. That's what EMA ribbons are for. There's some things that don't give you any confidence in the trend. There's some charts where it doesn't tell you anything, and in that case, there's a good chance you don't have a trend. And that's one of the nice things about EMA ribbons. I find it, the tricky thing about it is, you don't want to necessarily just say, I'm going to buy at this ribbon or at that ribbon, because that is not always, I mean, I have not been able to find any pattern of where in the ribbon you want to buy. It's more a question of, if the ribbons are set up in that direction, it's telling you that the trend is good. And then simultaneously, when the ribbon changes direction, like there's another one of arc, same sort of thing. You have a period here of the ribbon losing its direction and then pointing the other way. You want to heed these things, because this will kind of give you that sense of trend. Okay. What time frame are these charts? These are all daily charts. Okay, so those are all the things in my PowerPoint, but there were some other things I wanted to talk about here very quickly. First of all, let's go to TradeStation.com. I want to show you a couple of things. So first, I'm going to just get rid of my workspace. TradeStation is has a few things on the website that we want to kind of look at now. One of them is, first, I want to just quickly show you, go to research and go to insights. This is the market insights blog that I write. And so basically, I wrote this article about Alibaba, and there was a lot of call buying in Alibaba yesterday. And in this article, I also kind of outlined some of the things happening in the Chinese market. What's also interesting is, right before, I did an article on TradingView, kind of looking at things happening in the chart. And what's interesting is, if you actually look, TradingView is an outside charting service that you can link to your TradeStation account. But we had kind of put this up, and I'd written it the night before, and then by the time I was able to put it up, it was already jumping. And then a lot of things were happening, and the stock had a significant move. It was just an interesting sort of thing happening here. So I kind of outlined the case here of what's happening, and there were trying to think, is anything else I wanted to share with you guys recently. Those are the main things. You might want to just kind of look around some of the things on the Market Insight blog. We did do an article, like I said, about fertilizers a while back, and some of those things. But I'm trying to look at a lot of those different trends. The thing that's been most important to me recently really has been, and this article I wrote last week here about breakout or breakdown in the S&P 500. A lot of these, for example, I mean, this trend following works pretty well here for the S&P 500. Look at the EMA ribbons. It's been giving you a downward signal for a while. And what's also interesting is you can see that we had a very tight kind of channel here that I had highlighted in this article. It's the one with the woman kind of thinking here. And so now we've kind of resolved this in a bearish direction. So, from my perspective, there were a lot of signals that I wrote about at different times kind of pointing toward this bounce. But now the problem is we're at a point of the year when there's several Fed meetings to go. There's, a lot of companies came out with bad news recently, like Intel had a warning yesterday. Microsoft had a warning, bad earnings from, Target and Walmart. So there's not a lot of things to be, really positive here. The thing is, there are a lot of signs, in my view, that inflation is actually starting to improve. I run through those in an article I did recently here. If you go to events, this article about lumber prices and things. And it's interesting, after I've written some of these things, I've seen economists and other people write similar articles. Bloomberg had a story just yesterday about the sell-off in lumber prices. But so just check out Market Insights, and you can sign up for the newsletter and see some of the things we we put out, and some of the things we do on TradingView as well. So now, let's go back to TradeStation.com. I'm going to go here to log in, and I'm going to log into Web Trading Live, because a lot of these things you can also do on your. Let me log in here. And if you guys are curious, by the way, you might see like a large amount of money in my account, which is a simulated account. So don't think I have a bunch of real positions worth tons of money. You might have seen that over here. Said I had like a $4 million account. This is just, so we're already logged on. Do you want to, yes, let's disconnect that. Good. All right, it's disconnected. And here is the web platform. So I wanted to show this. I already have this set up, all right, to work with, all right. So this is set up now with the first chart with Keltner channels. I'll just quickly mention that this is now the TradeStation platform that I've disconnected from. But just so you realize, this chart here of EMA ribbons and relative strength, these indicators are not available in the web trading app. The other ones are. So I put these together. There's a reason why I organized these the way I did. And this one is not. Both of these are not available on the web app, which is why I put them together in the workspace. So now we're starting off with the first one, which was the Keltner channels, and basically this is set up the same sort of thing: Keltner channels and rate of change. So I wanted to show you that to begin, and now I'm going to show you how you can adjust this. So the way you manage this is you go to the little like flask thing, like a chemistry, and then you basically, this is how you can control the indicators. So I'm going to remove these by Xing them out, and then I'm going to start typing in. Let me just go here, RSI, and then those are the the settings. I kept all the same settings. All these are, I kept the same settings pretty much for everything that comes kind of out of the box that are most conventional. So that's the way, in this case, you would add something like RSI. And for something like Tesla here, it's interesting. You can see that this had overbought signals and oversold signals. And that's how you adjust those. And then the next thing was Parabolic SAR, the 200-day moving average. If I go to my studies, I'm going to go to Parabolic. I can start typing Parabolic. Can add that. I can go to moving average one line, which is what it's called. I can add that. I can remove, wait a second, remove RSI. No, let's add that. Now, I can then go and set it. I'm going to set it to 200-day. We want a longer term 200-day moving average. And I like to make it green for 200 days. So I can just set my color here. And now we have the same sort of signals. So, as I mentioned, these things are good to use in conjunction with each other. They are, there's no single thing in any situation that's going to tell you the best sort of opportunity. But the key thing with something like trends is it can be difficult to, very often, like if you were bearish on Tesla, it can be really hard to sell. You're like, oh man, that's going to rally, but you have the Parabolic SAR working in your favor. That sort of thing. That's the sort of thing with, with this sort of trend following. Some of these tools can kind of help point you in the right direction. The key thing we always want to focus on is what is the chart telling us? What is a trend, first of all? And the second thing we want to be careful of is, are we entering at a wrong time? Are we, buying the pullback too quickly? Do we have any signal to tell us that the pullback is a good opportunity? And that especially is when something like Parabolic SAR can help. And that's also something when something like Keltner channels can help. It can tell you when you have a potential good opportunity. So if I just go back here really quickly, let's put Keltner channels on one more time. I'll go to my studies. I'm going to remove these one last time, like for Keltner channels. And again, when you see something like this, again, for something like this, you can see the midpoint here, and again, that's the sort of thing where something like this could give you that kind of signal. And then when you see when it crosses the midpoint, that is the signal that the bearishness is no longer in effect. So, and then again, when it goes down here and it crosses the midpoint, you'll notice that you just kind of lose any sort of trend or any sort of direction. This is just an example of something like Tesla, which has actually not been trending as clearly as others. So those are the main things I wanted to really cover. Now you can see these with the slides and look at the examples yourself. Hopefully you guys really get this workspace to work. And remember, a lot of these are things that I cover a lot in Masterclass. Masterclass is a great opportunity for me to kind of talk to a lot of people who really love using TradeStation. I work with Jesus on it every other week. And I've created a lot of different indicators that people use. And this is the most recent one that I'm going to be sharing with people. But I wanted to just kind of let you guys know about it and also show, because I've really found that I put it like this: with TradeStation, you can see something with an indicator and then say, this is really interesting. I'd like to use it to do X, but I can't, I can't do that with other platforms. But with TradeStation, you can. I saw something with RSI and I was able to say, you know what, I'd really like to use RSI to simply kind of focus me on stocks from a bullish perspective or a bearish perspective, to give me an actual reading of how good or bad is the stock. And I was able to code it pretty easily. And if you guys, you know, look at that, you can actually see the code yourself, and hopefully you guys are able to capitalize on it. Okay. Past RSI is not in the indicator library. It is in the zip file that I shared. Let me see if I can actually share that link with you again. If you're late to, let me just go quickly and show you. If you open the zip file I just gave you, you're going to see three things. This is the actual indicator, and this is the workspace. So you want to first open the indicator. You want to double click on the indicator. You want to import it into your TradeStation, and then you can open the workspace. And these are the slides for the presentation. Are we able to change the settings in Parabolic SAR? Yes. So let's just go back here to web trading. Let's go to Parabolic SAR. Sometimes this thing is a little bit weird. Remove Keltner channels first. All right, so the inputs. I have to remember what these actually, if you look on the other, I'll very quickly go back to the TradeStation platform here. This is an easier way to do it because it explains what the things are. You can Google a lot of this as well, but I'm just going to double click on this, for example. Oops. If I double click on this Parabolic SAR, it actually explains it. One of these is the amount that it accelerates. So if you're actually curious about it, there's a dictionary. If you click on dictionary, it should bring up some of these explanations. Now this is not this one, but if you go to edit easy language, this is more kind of complicated. It will explain a lot of these things to you. You can actually look at the code, and there's comments in the code explaining to you what the different you know, the actual tools are. So for example, the input, right, so the one called AF step is the acceleration. So if that number is higher, what it will do is it will make the Parabolic SAR tighten more quickly. And then it also limits how much it can tighten, because at a certain point, it'll just tighten to the point when it just automatically flips in the other direction. So those are the main sort of indicators you can use for that. Now, I'll also mention that in some other classes, and I'm going to do this in the future, you can use Scanner with some of these things. And I don't have time to get into that now, but if you go to Scanner, you can actually say, show me a stock where the last price is above the Parabolic SAR, which would mean it's bullish. So we look at, like, you know, just some random bullish stock, like, you know, Chevron or something. You know, the price is above, you know, so say you were, you know, at this point, I don't see a lot of opportunities in a name like this, but say you were looking for an opportunity like this, you could say, show me stocks where the low price was above the Parabolic SAR. And if the price, I mean, the price is above the Parabolic SAR, because the SAR is under when it's bullish. So you can basically go to Scanner and you can say, show me where the low, I'll just show you really quickly. Go to Scanner. I'll just test very quickly, show you how to do this. Go to all symbols, for example. You know, it's not even gonna have time to finish this. And then I'm just gonna, you know, I'm gonna just remove some of these things. I'm gonna do this very quickly. But if you mess around with Scanner, most people who know how to use a computer can figure it out pretty quickly. You can go to price. You can go to, you can just go to last price, and then you can say greater than, and then you can go to indicator here. And then you go to Parabolic SAR. And then basically you want to see PARCL. And you want to say where the last price is greater than this value. And if you run this, this is going to, now you can add more things to it as well. You can say find stocks where the price is above the 200-day moving average. You can do all those things, but you can scan for a lot of these things as well, which is pretty good as well. All right. let me see if any more questions. The Parabolic SAR, does it look the same as if you draw trend lines? It looks similar, but it actually, like, for example, look at how this one curves upward. So for example, if you were to draw a trend line, you would look like this. You would probably, I mean, this is like so steep, you'd probably draw something like that. Parabolic SAR, what it will do is it will, account for the fact that, it's why it's called parabolic. You'll notice it draws in a sort of parabolic sort of fashion. And the other thing about it is you could draw a trend line. Let's draw another trend line here. You could draw a trend line here. Well, it's interesting, it broke that trend line. So anyway, it accounts for the fact that as the stock moves, what will happen is as it makes highs, it will tighten up closer, unlike a trend line does. Let me look for other questions. The farther the stock is from the indicator, the better, right? Not necessarily. In my view, the way to use something like parabolic SAR is to look for the signal and then the pullback. Or if it's or the opposite if you're in a bearish trend. The initial thing and then this. And in this, when you're running the scan, there's two outputs in the scan. One is the parabolic SAR value, and the other one is the days that it has been in a certain area. So this would be 1, this would be 2, this would be 3. So I just threw this thing in about scanner. You can basically say, show me when it's above parabolic SAR and the parabolic SAR has been in place for less than 10 days, for example. And it would have, at this point, it would have found that pullback in Chevron, for example, because it was positive, but it was only positive for what, 4 or 5 candles at that moment. So there's a lot of ways you can do stuff with scanner with this as well. So there is a recording on YouTube. Let's see if any other questions. Looks like those are most of the questions. It's great to talk to all you guys. Please do not hesitate to contact me at drussell@tradestation.com. It's actually, I saw a question here. Can we get a feed from Market Insights? If you're interested, actually, in the RSS feed, there actually is an RSS feed on it. If you go to Market Insights and you simply go to Market Insights and you type in feed, you can actually put an RSS feed into one of your, if you have an RSS feed reader or something like that. All right, great. It's great to talk to everyone. If I missed any questions, I apologize, but go ahead and please email me. Take care, everyone, and hope everyone has a great day.